In this chapter, we're going to be talking about the basic rules of XML. We'll start off by talking about the contents of XML files, where we'll discuss the types of content that you'll find in XML data. Then we'll talk about proper XML syntax, things like nesting rules, how attributes work, and other things you need to know to make sure that your XML files parse properly. Then we'll talk about how to make valid XML documents, and this is something that we'll revisit later in the course when we talk about document type definitions and XML schema. Finally, we'll wrap up with a discussion of XML namespaces, which provide a way for you to include XML data from different sources and avoid collisions with other tag names when you do so. All right, let's start off by talking about the contents of XML files. There are about a half dozen or so types of XML content that you'll run into when working with XML data. There's the XML document declaration, there's elements and attributes, comments, character data, processing instructions, and entity references. So in this movie, I'm going to give an overview of each one of these. The document declaration looks like this. It's an opening bracket with a question mark, followed by the letters XML, and then a version, an encoding, and then an optional standalone declaration. Now, the document declaration is technically optional, though the W3C recommends it if you're going to be using XML data. But you can make XML documents that don't include this. I don't recommend it, though. It's always a good idea to have the document declaration. It identifies the file as an XML document and provides a place for the encoding and standalone attributes. It has to be at the very beginning of the XML data. You can't even have white space before it. The encoding attribute defaults to UTF-8 if you don't include it, but it's a good idea to include it, and if you decide to use a character set other than UTF-8, like Unicode UTF-16 for example, this is where you put that declaration. The standalone attribute identifies whether or not the document stands by itself or depends on something else. If it requires other data, then you should say standalone equals no. Otherwise, if the XML data is complete by itself, set it to yes. Okay, let's talk about XML elements, which are sometimes known as tags. And if you've worked with HTML, these will look entirely familiar to you. Elements must have valid names. They can begin with an underscore or a letter, then followed by letters, digits, periods, hyphens, more underscores. They can't use the string XML in any case combination because the W3C reserves that. So for example, some valid tag names look like this. I can have underscore with capital E and then element 1. I can have my element with a period. I can mix and match hyphens and underscores. Some examples of invalid tag names are here. So for example, one tag. You can't begin with a number. You can't have invalid characters in the name like hash symbols and ampersands. You can't use the letters XML because those are reserved. Attributes in XML work the same way that they do in HTML. They're specified on opening element tags only. They have to start with a letter or an underscore, and again, they can be followed by digits, letters, hyphens, periods, and underscores. And just like tag names, attributes that begin with XML are reserved. Attributes appear only once on a given element. You can't have the same attribute name over and over again. All right, let's talk about comments. Comments are intended to embed information inside XML data that are readable by humans. They're kind of like comments in JavaScript or other programming languages. They don't actually affect the document data. They're just there for people to read them. They're defined with an opening angle bracket, followed by an exclamation point and two dashes, and then end with two dashes and a closing angle bracket, again, just like in HTML. They can go pretty much anywhere except inside element brackets and before the document declaration. This is an example of an invalid comment because it's inside the opening element tag. But this is okay. You can put comments inside of elements. Character data sections are specified using C data. They're part of the document, but the contents of C data sections are not parsed by the XML parser, and this is important. When the parser comes across a C data section, it simply skips the content. It doesn't try to figure out what kinds of entities might be in there or other kinds of special XML content. It just skips over the entire section. It's defined by using an opening angle bracket followed by an exclamation point, followed by an opening bracket, a square bracket, the word C data, another opening square bracket, and then ends with two square brackets and a closing angle bracket. It's typically used to contain unescaped textual data. It's not parsed, so special characters like an ampersand and other brackets are legal within there. And so why would you use this? Well, imagine you have a script section, right, inside an XML document, and inside that script I have a function. Now, this is going to cause a problem in XML, right? Because that return statement there with A is less than B contains an angle bracket. Now, this doesn't happen in HTML because the browser knows what a script tag is, and when the browser is parsing the script tag, it knows not to look for things like angle brackets and to treat them as opening tag names. But XML parsers don't know this. Remember, you can make your own tags up, and so inside a tag, if you have an illegal character, that's going to cause a problem. So the way you get around this problem is by enclosing this in a C data section. This will cause the parser to simply skip over the contents, and then you can put whatever characters you want in there. Processing instructions are a way for XML content to deliver special instructions to the XML parser. They have the form of an opening angle bracket followed by a question mark with a target name and an instruction, followed by a question mark and a closing angle bracket. Now, if you're paying attention, you might be saying to yourself, well, wait a second, that's the same format as the XML document declaration. And you're right, it is. It's pretty much the same format. The XML target name is obviously reserved because it's part of the document declaration. But a processing instruction can start with a number or a letter, then be followed by digits, letters, hyphens, periods, and underscores. And the reason you do this is because you have an application that can have options, for example, set by the XML content. For example, maybe you have an application that has multiple spell checking modes, and so you might want to write a spell check mode processing instruction with some kind of instruction saying, hey, use this particular alphabet when you're doing your spell checking. It's just a way for the XML data to contain information that the parser itself can use to affect how the parsing is done. All right, let's wrap up by looking at entities. Entities are intended to help shorten and modularize XML documents, and they provide markup for characters that would otherwise be illegal in XML content. There are general entities which are replaced by a parser with a full string. So for example, ampersand copyright semicolon or ampersand author semicolon, you can define these to be a string of content that will get replaced by the parser when the XML document is parsed. There are also character entities. So for example, if you wanted to include a specific character which is not available on the keyboard in your XML data, you can do that by using an ampersand followed by a hash symbol and then the character's code number. Some character entities also have special names. For example, the ampersand itself is specified by ampersand, then AMP, and then semicolon, or quote characters, which are ampersand, QUOT, and then a semicolon. All right, that pretty much wraps it up for types of XML content.